Okay, we're live. Hello, YouTube. This is always the weird part because we can't really see anything except our own confused faces. But we're going to assume that you are here and you are watching. And I'm going to start the introduction part where I talk for a little bit. So this is Pen and Brush right now. Welcome to Pen and Brush. This is our virtual space. My name is Lisbeth. I am the Literary Arts Manager at Pen and Brush. We are a 501c3. We're publicly funded nonprofit, and our mission is to support and promote the work of women and non-binary writers and artists. Now, normally we do this from a gallery in Manhattan, but our gallery is currently closed, and we are exploring ways that we can bring the art and writing community together from our homes. So welcome to our third remote event. This is our first time streaming to YouTube. So we're glad you're here. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Becky. You are here. We're glad you're here, Becky and everybody else. We're glad you're here. Please bear with us if there are any blips along the way. If something happens, we apologize. We're all new to the software and figuring things out. But one of the things that we are lucky to do at the Pen and Brush space is host writers to talk about their work, talk about new things they're doing. In the past, we've had Karen Haviland, Hala Alyan, and Nadina Laspina, among others, join us. And tonight, I am really, really thrilled that we could have Clare Beams and Mary South in conversation. So how this is going to work is, in a minute, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to introduce the authors. Each of them will read a little bit from their new books, and then they're going to chat for a bit, and then we're going to take some questions. So feel free to throw questions in if you have any, but we will get to all of them at the end. So settle in. This will be fun. If you need to drink something, eat something, need your sourdough, take care of it. We'll be here to entertain you. So our first reader is Clare Beams. She is the author of a short story collection, We Show What We Have Learned, and most recently, of the novel The Illness Lesson, which was published in February 2020. She has garnered numerous award nominations for her work, including, but not limited to, winning the Bard Fiction Prize and being a finalist for the Story Prize, the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize, excuse me, I always get that one wrong, the New York Public Library's Young Lions Fiction Award, and the Shirley Jackson Award. Her fiction appears in One Story, N+1, Ecotone, The Common, The Kenyon Review, Hayden's Fairy Review, Electric Literature's Recommended Reading, and the Best American Non-Required Reading. Wow, I am not on my game with introductions. Clare has received special mention in the Best American Short Stories 2013 and the Pushcart Prize 35. She has received numerous fellowships, and after teaching high school English for 6 years in Falmouth, Massachusetts, she moved to Pittsburgh, where she now lives with her husband and 2 daughters. She's taught creative writing at Carnegie Mellon University and St. Vincent College. So, over to you, Clare.
Wonderful. It is such a pleasure to be here. I love Mary's books so much, and we had planned to talk to each other at a live event in New York in March that did not happen for obvious and very reasonable reasons. But I am so pleased that we can recreate it in virtual form tonight. And thank you so much to Pen and Brush for giving us the chance to do that. So I'm just going to read for about 10 minutes. And I'm going to read not from the very beginning of the book. And so I have to just explain a tiny bit first. So this is my book, The Illness Lesson. What you need to know at this point is that we are at a brand new school for girls in 1871 Massachusetts, where an aging philosopher named Samuel Hood has decided to try for greatness one more time by starting this school to sort of show the world that girls can do all the same things that boys can do. Radical concept. So his 29-year-old daughter, Caroline, is our main character. And so she is also teaching at the school, along with David, her father's acolyte, to whom she she is finding herself increasingly drawn. So at the part that I'm going to read from, this is once the school has opened and once everything is starting to go wrong. So Eliza, one of their new students, is proving difficult in various ways, and she has just fainted mysteriously just before the part that I'm going to read from. There's also this creepy flock of red birds around called trilling hearts. And it also turns out that David has a wife he failed to mention, and much to Caroline's surprise. And he has brought her to the school to teach art alongside the others. So her name is Sophia. So this is a scene where Sophia and Caroline are watching David teach just after Sophia's arrival. Okay. In the barn, just before his lesson began, Sophia asked her husband, "Duck, aren't you going to sit at the desk?" She was close enough to Caroline on the visitor's couch that Caroline was breathing her flowery, humid smell. "Duck," Livia said, seizing on this extravagant gift. "That's what I've always called him. He just has a ducky sort of look to him sometimes." Sophia's mood seemed to be lifting, perhaps because David was at the front of the room and hers. "Please, Sophia," David said. He was trying to seem amused. This was the opposite of his usual act in the time just before his lessons began, when the girls would pepper him with teasing questions and he would feign offense. "What do you do when class is over, Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore, what's your favorite thing to eat? Do you like mornings or afternoons better? Summer or fall? Blue or green? Walking or riding?" Each question a search for a loose piece of skin they could pry up. David knew better than to answer most of the time, but Caroline had seen the way he relished the search. "Ducky," Felicity said. "Ducky duck," Livia said. "Please, girls." Samuel wouldn't have said please. He would have just stopped it somehow. But Samuel was in his study, reluctant perhaps to see any more of Sophia's first full day at Trillinghart. David took a breath, adjusted his face, and reached into his pocket for his notes. As he drew them out, just at that moment, as if he were pulling a rope, the section of ceiling over the bookshelves gave, with a wet, rotten-voiced splintering. A cascade of something fell to the ground. Everyone shrieked, then gathered around the column of dusty light that now stood in the room, peering up at a patch of blue sky. A cloud drifted. The boards sagged, lolled like a tongue. The smell, wet, rich, dark, animal, reached them, and they pulled back, covering their mouths. "What happened? It's not even raining," Meg said. Sophia gestured toward the board's moist, ragged ends and spoke through her fingers. "It didn't have to be. Look at the wood. It's amazing it held this long." The brown cascade had heaped at their feet. Like the weave of a basket, it was at first one thing, one dun-colored mass, and then, when the gaze lingered, many small bits of things. Slivers of soft wood, but also loose twigs, grasses, all of it wet-looking. A dirty tuft of reddish-brown feather, pieces of it still together enough to suggest curvings, cuppings, but of several different circumferences. Caroline tried to assemble the mess into one shape in her imagination. "A nest?" said Felicity, wrinkling her sharp nose. She towed the feather, closer even than David to the whole mess despite the smell. Felicity, Caroline sometimes suspected, might have a future as an intrepid explorer of some distant region. "A Trillinghart nest?" "I don't know," said David. "It's the wrong time of year, but it does look that way. They must have piled all this on the roof and then water accumulated in it, and that's the source of the trouble." Could the others see now that they were being invaded? These birds were not some beautiful romantic happening, some transforming touch to turn life into Samuel's essays. They were strange, savage creatures that carried their inscrutable nature with them and sent it raining down on top of other, feebler plans. And could the others smell it? Caroline peered up through the ceiling hole into the sky, craning for a glimpse of what? Whatever landscape the birds had made of their roof. Though somebody would have seen, wouldn't they, if there were much more than this, if this weren't all or close to all of it? "Oh," said Julia, and pulled something from the jumble, touching only the corner. "Look, the lace bit I was missing." "We told you none of us took it," Livia said. "It's all stained." Julia dangled it so they could see the watery blotch in the middle. "Do you think with washing?" From within the layer of brown peeked something else, underbelly light. Caroline bent and lifted it, a small bit of fraying ribbon, sun and rain bleached to a faint seafoam color, rough between her fingers with grime. "That's mine," said Abigail. "I lost it the first week." "No, I think it might be mine. I've been missing my blue ribbon for ages," said Tabitha. "It isn't blue, though. It's green. I dropped one just like it somewhere," Eliza said. "Can I see?" asked Rebecca, taking it from Caroline's hand. "Really, I think it's mine. My sister gave me a pair of them for my birthday. I've only got one left in my box upstairs." "Girls," said Caroline, taking it back, "it's only a tiny scrap. It could be anybody's, or a tatter of laundry from the next house. Certainly it's good for nothing now, anyway." David used his foot to rake the pile toward the corner, as if in this manner the bird's invasion could be reversed, when the smell still hung, thick with life as the mud at the bottom of a river. He stretched up to push the loose boards back into place, but when he let go, they dropped again. "I'll nail it back up for now," he said. "I'll just be a moment. I'll fetch a hammer." This chance to escape a lesson that hadn't been going well was not, perhaps, unwelcome. The door closed behind him, and they all went back to their seats. The shaft of light hovered solidly, like a feature of a holy painting, and in the corner that formless, indecipherable heap. Slowly the smell dissipated. Slowly the room began to shift its attention to Sophia. She had long ago done what they all wanted to do, after all, pried up David's skin and gotten to the meat of him. "Mrs. Moore, how did you meet Mr. Moore?" Livia asked, leaning her chin into her hands. This Caroline did know how to stop. She could just stand, go to the blackboard, and copy out a prompt for the girls to answer in their notebooks while they waited. In doing so, she would show the girls they were not to ask such questions, and show Sophia she was not to refer to her husband as Ducky in front of their mutual students. Show her that she had perhaps much to learn here, and that Caroline knew it all already. But Caroline also wanted to hear the question, or the answer to the question Livia had asked. "Oh, when do you meet the people you've known forever?" Sophia said. "You were childhood sweethearts?" Rebecca asked. "I was a child anyway," Sophia laughed. "What were you wearing when he proposed?" "My best yellow gown. This was just after church." Every girl in the room was putting herself into that yellow gown and into the space in front of David. Caroline, too, could feel the sunshine warmth of its fabric under her palms, and beneath her own body, warmer still and soft. "He told me, 'You look beautiful. You always do. Would you do me the great honor of being my wife?'" Sophia's caricature of David's voice made Caroline flinch, all stiff, just like that, like he was reading lines. She laughed again, and the sound this time was low and almost secretive. Eliza said, "Do you think we should be discussing this?" Sophia stopped. "I mean, it's very interesting, but I wonder if Mr. Moore would like it, since he's not here," said Eliza with one of her best smiles. Eliza was paler and thinner than she had been, Caroline thought, the skin of her face tightening and drawing back. The look of suffering was on her like gray light, though since she had fainted, Caroline hadn't caught her suffering at anything. This intercession of Eliza's was, of course, a reprimanding of Caroline, too. "He'd think it's fine." Flustered, Sophia waved a hand. "I'm allowed to talk about him." But she didn't anymore. As they listened to the clock tick then, waiting for David's return, Caroline glanced, she tried not to glance, at the ribbon she put beside her on the couch, which looked, she tried not to think it looked, like one she'd had as a girl, a beautiful spring green ribbon she'd tied at the end of her long braid. Whatever happened to that ribbon? Thrown away or lost somewhere. It had probably not been sitting in the soil of their fields for over a decade, waiting for a beak to pluck and carry it. No reason to look at this scrap and read her name. And what if it were hers? There was no special meaning in that. Only that so many years had passed and the birds had plucked the ribbon straight through those years for some purpose of their own, and here she still was, just the same, to meet that purpose, to have it done to her. And I think I'll stop there.
Oh my gosh. Well, if you're doing, that was incredible. And if anyone is doing video conference bingo at home, I just forgot to unmute myself before I started talking. So you get a square there. Thank you, Claire. I love that scene. Some of the viewers do too. I'm going to introduce Mary, our second reader. Mary South is a graduate of Northwestern University and the MFA program in fiction at Columbia University. For many years, she has worked with Diane Williams as an editor at the literary journal Noon. I'm going to insert something that Mary didn't put in her bio, which is that Pen and Brush and Noon were briefly talking about doing an event last year, and it didn't work out. And I'm so glad that we can sort of, I don't know, extend a hand to Noon and all the wonderful people there by having you here, Mary. I was really disappointed when that one fell through. We're big fans. Mary is also the recipient of a Breadloaf Work-Study Fellowship and residences at VCCA and Gentel. Her writing has appeared in American Short Fiction, The Baffler, The Believer, Bomb, The Collegist, Conjunctions, Electric Literature, Guernica, Los Angeles Review of Books Quarterly, The New Yorker, Noon, The Offing, The White Review, and Words Without Borders. Miley Malloy awarded her story Not Setsuko, which is in her new collection, by the way, an honorable mention in the Zoetrope All-Story Fiction Contest. So over to you, Mary.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute honor to do this event with Claire. As you can tell from that beautiful and eerie excerpt, her book is extraordinary, and I'm glad we can come together and talk remotely in our new distant state still, and enjoy our books either way, regardless of our current situation. So I'm actually going to read from the beginning of Not Setsuko. It's the last story in my collection, though it was one of the first to be written. And the collection is a lot about technology, characters using technology to self-soothe or avoid grief or negative emotions. And this story in particular is about a mother who loses her daughter tragically and unexpectedly. And so she clones her and then tries to remake all of her memories so she can live in the illusion that she has the same child back, because the grief just seems too unbearable for her. And the project goes into sort of an extreme place, as you'll see. So this is Not Setsuko. Unlike most mothers, I gave birth to my daughter Setsuko not once, but twice. The first was a sunny day in the middle of summer, and she came without complication. It was an easy, joyful birth. The second was a stormy afternoon 10 years later to the date. I was induced in the same private hospital under the care of the same doctor. With the same laser-whitened smile, he had apparently delivered the babies for some of LA's most famous actresses. That time, however, Setsuko was taken out of me by emergency cesarean. She was breached, and the umbilical cord was suffocating her slowly, knotted around her neck. Ever since, I have worried about the effect this may have had upon her reborn psyche. In a few weeks, she will turn 9, the last day of her first life, and I am trying to prepare her for it. Before, she stood 4 feet, 4 inches tall, and registered 55 on the scale. Now, she only reaches to 4 feet, 3 1/4 inches, and weighs more than 60 pounds. This is not satisfactory. Every morning, I wake her early for a workout and take her measurements. "Rise and shine, sleepyhead," I say in my most sing-song motherly voice. She groans and burrows stubbornly under the covers, but I don't take no for an answer. Children need their parents to be authority figures and instruct them how to stay disciplined. 62 pounds, I sigh in disappointment, recording the number. Let's get you running. I set the treadmill at a challenging incline and work her up to a healthy sweat. "Faster, Coco," I encourage over the thumping of her shoes. "No," she shouts and climbs off the machine. She retreats to a corner and hugs her legs to her chest. Her hair falls over her face. "I'm not fat." "Honey," I reply, kneeling beside her. "I know that, but you don't look the way you used to look. You were so pretty and popular. Don't you want to have that again?" She raises her mournful eyes to meet mine and nods. "Then hop back up there." After the physical exercises, I put Setsuko through her mental paces. "Do you remember what you wanted to be when you grew up before you were 9 the first time?" I ask. "Did I still want to be a professional ballerina?" "Not anymore," I frown. "If you get it right, I'll let you have a treat." She scrunches her face in concentration, then brightens and pops her eyes wide open. "A vet," she cries. "I wanted to be a veterinarian." "Good," I say. "Do you remember why?" "Because of Miraku," she says. I take out a packet of mochi from the cupboard and pass her a rice bonbon filled with red bean paste. She snatches it from my fingers. Our cat, Miraku, as if on cue, jumps up on Coco's lap. "Miru," Coco squeals and covers the furry forehead with kisses. Tonight, I am going to go through with the Miraku incident. No more excuses. For what would be her final Christmas, we gifted Setsuko with a completely white kitten. She doted on the animal and rushed home from school to cuddle her and play catch the fabric mouse. Mistakenly, we let Miraku wander outside. Our house is on coastal property in Malibu, so we thought she would merely chase gulls and dig up hermit crabs by the water. When she didn't come home one night, we went scouring the beach. But living by the ocean also means that we're next to the Pacific Coast Highway, and in the morning, a neighbor brought us Miraku's slender body. The cat had been hit by a car. Setsuko cradled the kitten to her chest, the white coat matted and soiled, and cried. It broke my heart. I knelt down, enveloped them both in my arms, and cried too. I promised my Coco I would get her another kitten. Of course, I never had the chance. It's regrettable that our restagings haven't been totally consistent. For example, when Setsuko number 1 was 7, we went snowboarding at Big Bear. She was having so much fun, gliding effortlessly along the slopes, until she had a bad spill and fractured her wrist. I wanted to create this event anew somehow, but my husband, Wyatt, expressly forbade it. Still, I comfort myself by recalling that I had my second Setsuko wear a cast around her undamaged arm for 6 weeks anyway. To compensate for the missing memory, I frequently have her narrate the event from start to finish and test her on the details. My hope is that if she repeats the story long enough, the fiction will become her reality. Tell me about the day at Big Bear, I say. We're overdue for a full recitation. We drove out of the city and up a mountain road. It was afternoon when we got to the lodge. We strapped into our boots and boards, and a ski instructor showed us some moves on a bunny hill. I fell over a bunch of times, but eventually figured out how to keep my balance. Fine, I say, but I want specifics. Use your 5 senses. How cold was it? What color was the snow? The snow was white like Miraku, but almost blue. It was really cold, so cold my toes went numb, and I had to go eat French fries and warm up inside. Continue, I reply. I was nervous at first, but after lunch I wasn't nervous. I wanted to try a hard trail like the older kids. I boarded a lift to a black diamond. I was doing okay, but then I hit an icy patch. I fell and landed on my wrist. I couldn't stand back up, it hurt so bad. Some nice men came and took me down the hill on a stretcher. Well done, Setsuko, I say. She flashes me a goofy smile, showing the gap between her 2 front teeth. It seems to me she always used to smile a lot more. I'll have to correct her about that later. I'm so proud of you, I'm going to let you have another mochi. She gently cups the dough and smells it in pleasure before taking a bite. You must be looking forward to your birthday, I add. You'll be allowed to eat as much candy as you want. I'm more excited for my 10th birthday, she says under her breath, but it's not lost on me. We've been restaging her parties for so many years that I will hardly know what to do when I have to organize one from scratch. Now go practice your instrument, I say. While Coco is distracted with scales on the violin, I grab Miraku, sneak out the back door, and set her in the middle of our driveway. I climb into Wyatt's convertible and slide my key into the ignition. In the rearview mirror, I watch the cat sniffing at the ground. To psych myself up and calm my shaky nerves, I rev the engine a couple times. It's okay, I say. You're doing this for your daughter. The tires scream as I run over the animal with the sports car. I check my work. The pelvis and hind legs appear to be broken, but Miraku is alive, yowling in pain. Shit, I mutter, and get back in the convertible. I want to cry, but I need to stay strong. Sometimes you have to do bad things in order to manifest good things. During the second attempt, I'm fairly confident I feel the wheels crunch the skull against concrete. I hide the body in a trash bag in the garage and wait for my husband to come home. Before the rebirth, Wyatt demanded I go into therapy. It was one of his conditions, he said. Initially, he wanted me to join him in his bereavement group, but I declined. If our baby was returning to us, there was nothing to grieve. When I began describing plans for restagings, my counselor was curious as to why I couldn't let Setsuko make new memories. Did she have kids? I asked. She didn't. Well, I explained, one of the frightening things you learn when you become a parent is that you can't protect your children from life. Anything can go wrong. They can slip on the bars of the jungle gym and get a concussion. They can die of SIDS in the night. They can be kidnapped. The only power you have is to give them the best chance possible. Could I control everything that happened to Setsuko? No, I couldn't. But since she used to be such a delightful little girl, so exuberant and charming, I was determined to provide her with the memories that made her that way. Besides, I said, it wasn't that strange anymore for parents to seek a duplication. Several celebrity couples have done so, like they showed in that documentary. Why shouldn't I? That answer seemed to placate both her and my husband. What I didn't say was that I also plain miss my daughter, and whenever I see a flash of the old Setsuko in her new incarnation, I feel a surge of love in my chest. Yes, I think, this is how it is supposed to be. Here she is, my Setsuko. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. That is such a good story. This is the part where Mary and Claire get to talk to each other. So I'm going to just get out of the stream and let you guys talk to each other in the fascinating way that I know that you do.
Yay.
So Mary, maybe I could start with a question for you. Is that okay?
Sure. I was going to say the same thing, but you
Okay. I love that story that you just read from. That's actually the first story of Mary's that I read, because when we met each other at Breadloaf, that was the story that you were using for workshop. I just love that one. Okay, so what I wanted to ask you, one of the things that I love most about this book is how smart it is. These stories are so inventive and witty, and they're full of this sort of like joyous authority about everything from brain surgery to Japanese film to high concept architecture. And I think of them as operating almost like these sort of gorgeous intellectual puzzles. I mean, they do other things too, but they have that element to them. And I'm wondering, like, how on earth you go about building a puzzle like that. So I guess what I'm asking is, where do you find the seeds and territory for a new story? Like, how does the start of it come to you?
So form is really hugely inspirational for me. I think you mentioned one of the stories is structured as like a frequently asked questions page for like a hospital's website, and it's a neurosurgeon, you know, just answering like, this is what you can expect when you come in to get surgery. And it sort of goes off the rails and then becomes more and more about her personal life and like a trauma that she's experienced. And just sort of like trying to play with different forms really is a, you know, place where I just get a lot of joy. And I think that you should always try and go where the joy is, because if you're having fun, then the reader will also potentially really see that and appreciate it too. So I love that you see them as puzzles, because for me it's a little bit like that too, and I feel like I'm tinkering with something and trying to see, like, opening something up and seeing the mechanism inside and how I can, you know, change it or understand it or and then put it back together again. Because then there's another story that's like an architect, and it's like structured as a fake profile piece about this famous architect, and then that also kind of sort of unravels and then gets put together at the end.
Right.
So it's just, you know, it's just fun. I don't know. It's like, it's then, you know, I spend a lot of time doing research too. And there's like a great pleasure for me in just doing research and getting a lot of facts and information and just putting them in a huge document, and then sort of building a story in my mind, like this whole world in my mind before I start writing something. I've had documents that are hundreds of pages long for stories I haven't even written or failed writing. Like I had one about like all about facts about aviation, from like the history of it to like, you know, failed flight inventions.
Oh, those are so great. I've stumbled across those too. Yes. Are you
and then like people who made those inventions and tried to fly them and then like, you know, didn't succeed and stuff like that. I was like trying to write this story about a woman who lost her husband in a fatal accident, not from a failed invention, but from like just a regular plane crash. And then she was going to like go through and like look through all these sort of talk about the history of aviation. And I couldn't ever write it. It just never turned out right. But hoping one day I'll be able to.
Yeah, you never know. Like, it may still. I do just feel like it's just not a linear process in that way either. Like, your hundreds of pages do go somewhere. They just don't, like, you can't do the math on it. It's not like, you know what I mean?
It's true. Yeah. Like, it just, you don't know how it's going to turn out. It's sort of a dangerous risk to like put all this stuff together and
right.
then, spending all this time doing research and not knowing if you'll get a story out of it.
Right. But I think that, like, if there's not that element of risk, then odds are that what you're writing is not very exciting for you or for anyone else, And I think that that's been hard for me to sort of embrace as a writer. I think at one point I wanted to sort of plan everything out more. But I think I love what you said too about going where the joy is. I think that's such a good and important lesson that I forgot for so long. And I think it turns out to fix so many problems. And also, it's just, you're never going to write in your real life if it's not fun some of the time. Like, you're just never going to manage to do it. It's just so hard to make the time for it anyway,
Oh, yeah. Agree 100%. I was sort of going to ask you a similar question that, like, I love your short stories in addition to your novel, and like the worlds of your stories. And We Show What We Have Learned are so rich. Like, I'm thinking of Ailments, which is set in the 1600s, and it's about a woman who harbors feelings for her sister's husband who works as a plague doctor.
Story.
And then there's another one, The Saltwater Cure, which is sort of an account of these gentle charlatans who run an inn located next to a miracle saltwater marsh in the 1930s. Mm-hmm. And like, I could see either of those stories. They're so fully imagined and so rich. I could see them being a novel in and of themselves. And like, I'm wondering where like you get some of the inspiration for them, and how you knew the illness lesson should be a bigger story, should be a novel and not a short story.
Well, I think I didn't know. I sort of hoped that it could fill more pages. Stories, whether they are large or small, tend to sort of start with images for me. So that tends to be where the thing begins, is some like sort of imagined mental picture that just is sort of interesting to me for reasons I don't usually fully understand, and that actually I sort of work hard not to fully understand for a while so that I can kind of make them complicated enough. I think if I try to get my rational brain in there too quickly, I tend to flatten things out by trying to control them too hard. So both of those stories did begin. So with Ailments Ailments actually began, this is funny to remember now in the context of our current moment, but I was listening to the radio on my commute home from my job at the time, which was teaching 9th grade English on Cape Cod. And we lived south of Boston because my husband worked in Boston. So we both had these just enormous commutes and all this time in the car. And it was around the time of swine flu, so H1N1. Mm-hmm. And there was a story on NPR about people not taking communion from the communion cup because they were worried about sharing the germs. And I started just sort of, that image was interesting to me, this idea of this like holy vessel that's supposed to sort of solve everything for you faith-wise, potentially being this risk, and sort of like, what would it be like to be one of the first people who glimpsed that, that idea, which is what one of the characters in Ailments sort of feels. So, and then pretty quickly, once I started sort of poking around at that idea, I came across these plague doctor costumes that used to exist. And that image was very interesting to me too. And the idea that you can't really see the person. It's this, if you've ever seen them, they're these crazy, like, it looks like a giant bird. Like the person's sort of draped in this like oilcloth. And then there's like a large beak on the mask that was stuffed with all these herbs that were supposed to ward off the bad air, because this was all happening sort of at exactly the juncture of understanding what germs were. So some people kind of were getting that sense, and some people just had this sense that like the odors maybe carried the germs. So anyway, so I tend to start with sort of an image like that. And in the case of the novel, it was these bright red birds. I potentially am interested in birds also, realizing as I'm talking.
I love those plague doctor costumes. They look super metal.
They're a fascinating thing to look at. I think the only thing that gave me the sense that the illness lesson might be longer initially was that I didn't have I wanted to write about sort of more of a situation and more of a whole school and a whole world. And sometimes with a short story, I have a sense that there's going to be this one image that's going to kind of arrive at one moment at the end. I didn't necessarily have that sense with this. So, well, great. I have another one for you. Are you?
I want to ask you about the image thing, because that sort of like led into my next question. That like there's so much beautiful imagery in the book. I mean, you mentioned the trilling heart birds, but I was like, you know, paging through your book anew this past week to prepare for our conversation, and I saw like new connections between images and the colors throughout. Like I saw, you know, those birds at the forefront, but then they're sort of they show up again here and there, like when Eliza starts experiencing some symptoms, she gets like a red spot in her eye. And I immediately thought of like, I hadn't put that together at first, but it made me think of like a bird in flight, this like spot just appearing in the whiteness of her eye. And same to like the previous chapter to that, there's also like a red fire in the night, like an torch in the forest. And I wanted to ask you about sort of like threading these images through your novel. And as I say threading, I'm even thinking about like the cloth and the pieces of the girls' dresses that appear and the ribbons throughout to make for the trilling hearts to make their nests. So if you could speak to that and sort of creating this, like, you know.
Yeah. Well, like, so what you were talking about before about form being so exciting to you, I do think that image, for whatever reason, is just like nothing makes me happier than describing stuff. And it's not necessarily like a great trait, I don't think, as a writer, because it tends to, you can go overboard with it. Like you can create these like vast passages of just static description that are really only interesting to you, you know? So I have to sort of work, I think for whatever reason, that is where the spark of a story, like where its first spark is for me, is just in this sense of like picturing things. And then I have to sort of figure out who could interact with these sort of mental pictures that I have. Like, how can I make them move? And how can I make them sort of interesting enough to carry a story and carry things like theme. But so I don't really know what I'm doing rationally with images for much of my first draft writing. Like a lot of what ends up sort of seeming threaded through is just one of those things that like your subconscious brain just does. And I always worry, like when I talk about this stuff, that I'm sounding sort of more mystical than I am as a person. I'm really like pretty rational about most things, but I do think that there's a part of your brain that operates when you're writing that is kind of like the part of your brain that's in charge when you're dreaming. And if you sort of back off enough to let that weird part kind of step to the front, it does cool things. It also does like messy, terrible things that you have to get rid of for the thing to hang together. But things like those images and those colors end up sort of threading through. And I try not to be too consciously aware of like, ooh, I should bring some red in again, because you can get so, it can start to feel really heavy-handed and kind of too neat, I think, if you don't let it kind of grow and bristle and get weird and complicated. And I think that's what you're hoping you achieve by kind of just writing these messy drafts, which is, again, like not a linear, not an efficient process, but just letting your dreamy brain kind of take over and do weird stuff, like put a red spot in the girl's eye, you know, and then you can figure out why that's there later, you know. So
I think that's 100% true. It's like there's a right brain subconscious sort of thing working, like a creative part of your brain that like just sort of underneath, not even like, you know, in the forefront, like under the surface is like linking things together and doing a lot of work for you. And dreaming is like, I've gotten some story ideas from dreams before.
Yeah, me too. The title story in my collection actually was like, I wasn't quite asleep, but it was like that one of those like almost asleep, like weirdo ideas that you have as you're falling. I had never written anything weird. And it was such an interesting idea to me that I just decided to try it. And it kind of ushered me into like a whole different way of thinking about fiction, I think. But yeah, well, so actually, what'd you say?
Which story was it in the collection?
So What We Have Learned is the earliest story in that collection, and really kind of was very unlike anything else I had ever done up until that point. I was writing this very like carefully controlled realistic fiction up until I wrote that story. Like all through my MFA program, all through like the several years after, I was still just writing these like tense family dramas, you know.
Oh, yeah.
which I love some tense family dramas. It's just mine was not, you know, my stuff in that vein was not very good.
Mm-hmm. So I'm glad you found the strange and wonderful Clare Beams style, because it's magical. It's wonderful.
Thank you. I want what you had said reminded me, because I also, in revisiting your book this week to sort of get ready for this, found that, you know, I first read this book many months ago, and I found that it hit me so differently, or not differently, it maybe just hit even harder the same things that it had hit the first time in the light of our sort of current surreal moment that we're in. What I mean by that is just that, you know, you are doing so much fascinating thinking, I think, in this book about just the nature of technology and the nature of connection, and sort of what does virtual connection mean, and what does it give us, and what does it get in the way of? And I was paging through, and I found myself underlining, there's the main character in your title story says to another character at one point, "I don't understand why we need more tools to connect with others. Sometimes we don't know the people we already know." And I just felt like, you know, now that we're all in our like bunkers, I mean, you're so prescient. I sort of wondered if, first of all, if you have felt any sort of eeriness looking back at these stories in terms of our like current, such an extreme state of this. All we have is virtual connection to some extent. And what does that mean for any of us? And then also, I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about these stories' take on what it means to be connected. A little bit.
Well, thank you. It's a marvelous question. Yeah, it is sort of a little unsettling for me that like this collection is published just as, you know, and it's about people who are using the online world, the internet in particular, more than other forms of technology, to like avoid feeling things, because, you know, underneath that avoidance is like real pain. Yeah. Or, you know, they're using it to self-soothe. Like in the story you mentioned, the title story, it's about a woman who is doing content moderation, you know, which is screening, you know, videos for violent and upsetting content from the general public. And she's also, in the same time, sort of tracking her rapist online, and she starts tracking him in real life. And that's like, she's using that, and she's doing that because like she wants to avoid these, you know, feelings of guilt and pain. She wants to like feel like she has some control over the situation because he hasn't been held accountable for anything that he's done. And she's afraid for other women. She's afraid that, you know, he's going to do the same thing to other women that he's done to her. Right. And you know, I first started writing that story in particular in 2015, and so it was before the Me Too movement or the election. And you know, I don't consider that so much a testimony to my prescience as it is about the fact that women have been dealing with this kind of thing for ages. But it's funny because I originally worried in writing a lot of these stories, like, will they become dated? You know, like technology moves so quickly and publishing moves much more slowly. So, you know, if I include something, will it, you know, will there be like a Friendster moment of like, oh, haha, no one uses that anymore? Like, you know, when is this written? But yeah, so it's a little uncomfortable.
The universe was like, well, we'll show you timeliness.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, one of the beautiful things about this moment, and like there's so much about it that is hard and deeply sad, but the people really are connecting with each other online. Like, and there's some, you know, upsetting or uncomfortable moments, like there's Zoom bombers who are trying to subvert the technology to, you know, do upsetting things in this time. But then people are, you know, connecting with loved ones and sometimes people that they haven't spoken to in years. Like I know I have, and then some, you know, people I know of, some friends of mine have said like, oh, I've connecting with people I haven't spoken with since college.
It somehow makes you realize how much it's truly worth the effort to reconnect with those people that you're thinking about. You know, now that it's so hard to do, it feels like you have to use any means you have to do it, you know?
Yeah. So like, you know, technology is ultimately a tool, and it's fascinating that people's as much as it evolves, like we're all ultimately the same. Like our emotions and our desires and our needs and our vulnerabilities are the same. So it doesn't matter that if we have a dating app that can introduce us to hundreds of different people, like we still want connection and love and you know you know acceptance from one to a handful of people. So,
Right.
um, you know, so it's interesting to me, that sort of duality, that and exploring that we're the same, even if no matter how much things change.
Yeah. I think
But
the stories do that so beautifully too, you know, because I think that even just the technology itself, I think in the stories, it truly does connect these people and yet the connections are imperfect in the same ways that the people are imperfect. And, you know, I think it's so, I don't know. I love that so much about these.
Yeah. And again, like I wrote down a question for you that was like, what's it like to have a book out right now? Because I know we spoke a little bit before, before the virus happened, about like, there's this treatment that happens to the girls in the illness lesson. And then the Me Too movement happened, and then like all of these men trying to control these girls' bodies and treat them in a way that is not a way that they desire or feel comfortable with, like has new relevance. But now it even has another new relevance and timeliness and topicalness by the fact that it's about an illness and these girls all getting sick. And I know that I think it was on a list recently, was like Crime Reads, like one of 14 books about epidemics and plagues. And
right.
So I was wondering how you feel about that, and like,
it's so strange. I mean, I feel like, so there was so much discussion for so long about the title of my book and whether we should change it, because there was this view amongst some parties that perhaps illness was like a downer, and that like no one was going to buy a book about illness. And what I find, it's another of those like just little sort of comic jokes of the universe that like, it's just sort of illness is now such like sort of almost like a buzzword because of our current moment. And yet of course, like the plague that happens amongst the girls in this book is a very different kind of plague than the coronavirus is, in that it does not have like sort of a one pinpointable physical cause. It's sort of a manifestation of the sort of psychic space that these girls have been put into in lots of ways. But I also think that even our like simple physical cause of this coronavirus, like there is so much that we don't know about it because it's so new, that I think some of the things that they deal with in the book are like some of the things that we're dealing with, and that no one quite, there are new developments every day about how the coronavirus spreads or doesn't spread, and what sorts of contact are safe or aren't safe amongst people. And just I feel like that sort of constant reevaluation, and that having to assess what sort of a threat exists in the people around you is something that feels sort of very connected to the book in ways that like I never ever could have had predicted or wished for, which is true of the treatment in the book too. You know, I had come across this historical treatment for hysteria, and had realized that it needed to be in the book, and had written a version of it into the book before all of the disclosure about Larry Nassar sort of came to the fore. I think it's very strange the way that fiction can turn out to have these resonances with our current moment that the writer could never have been aware of. And I think it really goes back to what you were saying, and that it's not so much that fiction is prescient, it's that these things exist all the time, and every once in a while they're just sort of brought sort of up, they're sort of unearthed in sort of the popular consciousness, but that doesn't mean they weren't there before.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in New York City right now, and I don't know if anyone could hear at the beginning of the start of our reading together, but there was like, it was 7 p.m. So you hear all the cheering for the frontline medical workers, which is a really beautiful thing. But what's interesting is that, me putting on my mask to go outside, and then coming home and feeling sort of, I have a very like primal like fear-based response of like what I have touched, and you know, like have I touched my face, like have I, you know, did I wash my hands thoroughly enough, and you know, if I cough or I, you know, have to clear my throat, it's like, oh, is this the start of something? Am I in danger?
Right.
So there's a lot of self-monitoring, and I was thinking of the girls in your book, and like, and there's a question of like, you know, are some of them really sick, or are they not getting sick? And I could see that sort of the mental space they get into, where like it sort of builds on each other, and like one person starts getting sick, and then another person thinks they're sick, and how, you know, that happens psychically.
Right. And to a certain extent, like, and I think that this is one of the things that the book sort of is partially about. It's like, if you think you are sick to a certain extent. Like, I think that the connections between the brain and the body are so complicated and are so are meaty in ways that we're sort of just coming to understand, I think. And I think like the girl's sickness in this book, I think it's a psychogenic illness, but that does not to me mean that it is not real.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And I think that that's sort of what the men around them are unable to understand, is this idea that it is, you know, it's not like they drank bad water and that's why they're sick, but it is also not true that they are faking it, you know? So
it's so good at putting the reader into that space of questioning. And it's, you know, possibly because we're through we're really in Caroline's point of view. And, you know, so she's seeing this happen from the outside before it starts happening to her on the inside. Right. And it's fascinating to me to create a character like that, as well as like the sort of ringleader of the girls, Eliza. She's sort of this very romantic, very, you know, she loves this text that her father wrote, The Darkening Glass, about sort of Samuel Hood's. He's the starter, the founder of the school, like his first failed community. And so like that doubt of like, you know, who do we believe is or not is amazing to me, and like how you constructed that in your book. Like, I don't know if you can say like, you know, what it's like to like sort of tease your reader with believability a little bit, but.
Yeah, and I think it was like one of the challenges for me was not knowing too much either, you know, like sort of trying hard to let it all become as complicated as it could.
I'm here with my little timekeeper hat on, because I know we had talked about making sure we have time for questions. And the reason I hopped in now, Claire, is because someone asked a question earlier about Eliza and embodiment. And I thought this might be a great time to shift into answering that question. This is Wards of London, about like 10 minutes ago, asked, the powerful scene where Eliza burns her ankle is a manipulation of the other girls, but it also feels like a desperate attempt to feel agency and control. Was it either or both for you?
Well, so I think one of the things that I had to learn in writing this book, in early drafts, Eliza was not complicated enough, and she was kind of just a villain, and she was just sort of like trying to get power from the girls and kind of using any means at her disposal to do that. And the book got a lot better once I realized, like, wait a second, like this is a girl, an adolescent girl who is sort of mourning this father she's never known. And there's no way she would even be able to go through like it might have started as a conscious attempt on her part, but there's no way she would even be able to go through sort of conscious motions like that without taking them inside herself. So I sort of started to realize that this was very real for her. And so I think things like that scene came in once I had sort of figured that out, once I had realized that we, not even so much that the reader needed to sympathize with Eliza, but that I sympathized with her in ways that I hadn't really given myself space to do at first. I have this tendency to do this when I write first drafts, that characters that my point of view character doesn't like, I shortchange for a long time. And then you have to go back and get the balance right of your main character is not going to like this person at first, but that does not mean that there's nothing there to like, you know, or to feel for.
That makes sense. Thank you. And I'm going to say to the folks who are listening, if you want to start asking questions now, feel free to start typing them in the box. If you two are okay to move on to Q&A?
Sure.
Okay. And I wonder if I could ask both of you a question. And I think, Mary, I'm going to maybe ask you to speak to this one first, but it is also a question for Claire. Because reading both of your works, I also, I thought the way you deal with women and bodies and how the female body becomes an art object was fascinating. And it was so interesting to see that come through differently in the two books. Claire, you have Caroline, who has been turned into an experiment and kind of an aestheticized ideal girl who claims her own body, which I thought was fascinating. And then Mary, you have characters who make art around the female body, and everything from architecture to horror movies, which I thought was I don't know, fascinating and interesting. And I think women who think but are also women have to deal with this a lot. How do you balance art and bodies, and making art out of your own body or other people's bodies? And I just wondered how you both ended up writing about those themes. Where did that come from for you? Was that a major preoccupation, or was it just, did it happen?
It was really important to me in my stories that I showed had some really strong female characters. So I think probably the one that's most relevant to what you speak of about creating art about bodies is Architecture for Monsters, about a woman she's doing a profile of a famous fictional architect who's a woman, and she is sort of creates these ravaged buildings, inspired by anatomy, but sort of disrupted or damaged anatomy. Like she has a condominium tower that's called Broken Rib Cage, sort of colloquially. It's like a rib cage severed apart during surgeries.
Trying to imagine that was so productively disturbing as I was reading, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah. It's something that I talk about in the story too, that she was sort of worried, this architect, of sort of, if she didn't create sort of buildings that had sort of something sharp or strong about them, that she wouldn't be taken seriously enough. And she kind of gets this reputation for being this sort of demanding, impossible person. But I think that because she's a woman, she's been, wants to be successful. It's for no other reason. I think hopefully that comes out through the story, that she's been sort of unfairly positioned this way, though there's other elements, and maybe that's had its effect and turn itself back on her too. Like she's had to respond to that and become, it's altered her. But I really wanted to have women in important jobs, as famous architects or neurosurgeons. I actually wrote the FAQ story for a long time, and it didn't have mention of the character's sort of gender. And a lot of people read it and assumed that the character was male in the first drafts. And I was like, no, it's a woman. It's a female brain surgeon. So then I went back and did more work on it.
Right. And she's smart enough to know that she's unusual. I love that line where she's complaining and she says, and basically a female brain surgeon is a unicorn. You should be grateful.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe that wasn't in the story at first, but yeah, it's important to me that women are seen as powerful in my work, even when they, sometimes don't feel powerful, like the woman in the title story who's, processing trauma. She has power in herself that she's going to, I hope that the ending of the story will seem like she's going to reclaim more of it.
Yeah, somebody actually had a question about the end of that story. Katrina here, how did you come to the end of that? Katrina appreciates your decision there. Was there something that, what made you decide to end the story that way?
So throughout that story, there's she's been seeing this mountain lion, sort of, or there's been rumors of it. Well, she has been seeing it, but there's rumors of it passing through the Bay Area, and that the tech culture is sort of tracking it and doing memes about it and stuff like that. And I wanted to set it up where it was going to seem like she was going to have this moment of catharsis at the end, but then didn't, because I didn't want to have a story where she was going to have this moment of catharsis and it was going to seem like everything's all better now, because that's not what happens. Processing a trauma like that, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of invisible work. She's doing invisible work for her job, and then she has to do all this invisible labor in processing her sexual assault that has just been like put upon her against her will. So
and it's such hard labor too. I think you do a really good job of showing how difficult that is.
Yeah. So the end of the story, she's been sort of trying to avoid it or self-soothe by like using the internet to like to track this man and sort of, you know, in a sort of subversive way, sort of confront him. But what I hope the end of the story like sort of communicates is now she's going to really do a lot of more hard invisible work of like emotional healing, and not just avoidance or you know filtering her feelings through the internet.
Yeah, unfortunately, Googling your ex does not help. Even for those of us that aren't in your story. Let's see. A couple of questions. Are you folks working on anything? Are you writing right now? I know we talked about this a little bit when we chatted earlier, but how are you making art? Are you making art?
Claire?
Well, so I'm trying really hard. What I was saying when we talked about this before, I haven't really felt this way about my time since I was on maternity leave. I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, and they are now home with me all the time. And so it's that same feeling of both having a ton of time, like having this weird pocket of separated time from the rest of the world that is sort of endless feeling, but also having no time at all because none of it is actually mine unless a bunch of other beings decide that it is mine. So I think the time that I have right now is basically my younger daughter's nap time, which is our older daughter's enforced quiet time, which is from like sometime between 1 and 1:30 and 3:30 when my older daughter like looks at her clock and is like, time's over, and comes marching downstairs to be entertained. And so I am trying to like pick away at something. I have sort of the glimmers of the start of a next novel, and I am trying very hard to sort of I just want to like keep my finger in it so that it feels like it's still alive. I'm not really trying to do like heavy lifting, moving it forward. I would love to be doing that, but someday that will happen again.
Someday.
Well, it's sort of both to me. I am and I am not. Like I find myself these days like much more easily distracted than I would normally be. There's, you know, and it's like I'll write an email and then I'll like look out the window and then 30 minutes will pass and be like, whoa, wait, did I finish that email? Or, you know, then there'll be a new news thing and I'll be like, oh, I'm going to read that. And so I feel a little bit distracted, but I also feel my mind working in that sort of subconscious right brain way that we were talking about before. I'm for my publisher, I'm working on a novel next, and I started to write it a little bit, but I'm also doing that thing I do, which is I put together references and thoughts and images, and you know, in a big document, and I'm getting a lot of ideas for that in that way. So like the novel is about women who are turning into household objects in a hospice for the 1%. And so I'm like thinking about all these like things that could happen. Like, is like a fashion designer going to come and like design dresses for women who are transforming into like plastic things, you know, and accommodate their various ports and parts. And so then I'm like looking up Iris Van Herpen like dress designs because she does things like use 3D printing or, you know, makes, you know, fashion collections like inspired by her visits to like a Large Hadron Collider and things like that. So I'm like putting all these like references together. And so I'm allowing my brain to like do a lot of, you know, work that way right now.
This reminds me, I was thinking of this while you were speaking earlier, Claire. There was a picture that was going around social media last week, and of course I can't find it now, of someone wearing a very elaborate like goth hoop skirt and a plague doctor mask in a grocery store. It's just so in line with this conversation. If I find it again ever, I will send it to you.
Oh my gosh, our modern world is so weird. Nothing like seeing a plague doctor person like buy their Funyuns at like, you know.
Yeah, and it really did look like a bodega too. She was not in a Whole Foods. It was like a late night run for like, I don't even know, whatever you buy at a bodega in the middle of the night. Oh man. that sounds like such a fascinating book, Mary. I'm so excited to
thank you.
see that whenever it arrives, however it arrives. Oh, okay. Katrina, if you have a link and find it, throw it in the comments because I couldn't find it earlier. Mary, this is a really interesting question from Chris. And I know you guys can both see the questions. I just figure I've got a little free time to see them that you don't because you're talking. With regards to your relationship to characters, are there any you've created who you loathe? And if so, how does that affect your process?
So loathe is a rather strong word. I mean, I definitely loathe the rapist in the title story. In terms of like the protagonists, I definitely think that there are some unlikable protagonists in my book, but I don't think anyone is unredeemable. It's just not true to life to me that we have like people that are, 100% good or 100% bad, except maybe our current president. But I really want to create like sort of nuanced and complicated people, and I want to show them by the end of the story, like, it's not an epiphany per se. It's like not I had this, transformative experience and that'll be different, but there's something has broken up open for them. Like they've realized something about themselves and how they're dealing with the world and how they're coping. And so that now they have the opportunity to change, that change is possible and growth is possible for them. There's a story in my book called The Age of Love, and it's about a man who's working as an elder care, a nurse in an elderly home, and the patients have started dialing phone sex hotlines because they're lonely and they crave companionship, and they absolutely deserve to have companionship and intimacy, no matter how old they are. And like it sort of becomes like a joke to him and the rest of the staff members who listen in the calls. And he confesses what's going on to his girlfriend, and she starts to find the calls fascinating and sort of develops a relationship with one of the men. And he becomes jealous of this like emotional intimacy that she's able to have with him that he isn't able to have with her. And it sort of ends their relationship. It sort of reveals him to be this sort of, in the moment, like very unlikable and sort of troubled person. But he also realizes that about himself, and like now he's sort of given the model for what real intimacy is by these men. That it was originally a joke, but then becomes really heartfelt and beautiful, I think, or at least I hope, by the end of the story. So that like now it's like here, change is possible. Like real intimacy is possible.
Yeah, when you were speaking earlier at the beginning of your answer to that question, that you like to write about characters who have something break open in their lives, that's exactly the story I thought about. I thought the change in the narrator and that was so beautiful.
A therapist once said to me that the thing they do with children is they show them a cube, and each side is painted a different color. Like one side is purple and one side is red and one side is yellow, and they just hold up one side and they say like, okay, what color is the cube? And the child will say like, oh, it's purple. And they'll flip it and they'll say, what color is the cube now? And the child will say, oh, it was yellow. And so then they can say, well, you see how the person that hurt you, like they have all these different sides to them, so that like when they're angry or when they're mean, that's the same person who can be gentle to you later and can help them like incorporate the same parts of someone into a whole. And that's image has really stuck with me. And I think that I apply it to characters of like, how can I incorporate all this into a whole, and then show the character then can see maybe that side of one that they weren't looking at before, the side that's purple, the side that's they're avoiding. And then they can like maybe change, they can change, become a different person.
I love that too, because it's like we know that about ourselves, because from the inside, like we would never say like, oh, we're just one thing, like I'm a quiet person, but I think that's something that it's hard to remember about people who are external to us. And that's one of the things that fiction can do is help us understand that everyone has all those, sides and colors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I imagine it's harder when the person you're looking at isn't a real person, somebody you're writing.
Yeah.
I'm sure you find yourself actively reminding yourself that the characters have to have a blue side and an orange side. The person who asked the question commented as you were answering that so many authors will defend their characters or shelter them. And I think right at the moment that Chris said that, you came around to making sure that you see all the cubes or all the sides of the cube and the characters, and that's such a productive image. I like that.
Yeah, isn't it? You know, it's my hope that, like, you know, despite these characters doing some like unlikable things, that like they are seen as a whole. They're not just seen as like the blue side. You know, you do see all sides of them. I'm not interested in writing like just purely evil people, you know, or like purely good people. Even in the title story, where I think the woman who's stalking her rapist is deeply sympathetic and a great character. Like, you know, what she's doing is, you know, illegal. You know, like stalking someone. It's not a good thing to be doing. You know, there's definitely sides to her too.
Yeah. Definitely. And then we have one more question here for you, Mary. Words of Linda points out earlier on, people referred to COVID as the great equalizer, which is now obviously completely untrue. But do you think that tech is the same in that it illustrates social inequalities or empowerment?
That is I don't know if I can, that's a really incredibly interesting question.
Yeah, part of me wants to see the short story you would write about tech and COVID in a couple of years, but.
Well, so like the first story in my book is called Keith Prime, and it's sort of a send up of Amazon, and it's and I really deeply resent and loathe Amazon and how it treats its warehouse employees, amongst other aspects of Amazon, and you know, so these people, there's these employees in this warehouse who are tending to also clones called Keith, and they're like used for parts for people. They're like harvested for parts for like organ donation for rich people that can afford them, and you know, poor people can't afford a Keith to save their lives. And so I think like tech does reveal inequalities. I'm trying to show that in some of these stories, that it, you know, reveals inequalities, like, you know, gig economy workers who like are tracked and optimized and monitored at Amazon, and if they don't get a product shipped and packed up and shipped soon enough, then they're penalized, and you know, you know, even now, like they're, you know, they've been protesting in order to get the rights they deserve. And they're, you know, it's not even like these are basic things that they should already have, like good pay and benefits, you know. So I think like tech can really reveal structural inequality that sometimes we just like take for granted. We don't see, and I hope I try to reveal some of that through my stories, and so we can see it, and then maybe keep working to try and change it.
I think so. I think the point that the narrator makes partway through Keith Prime, that she hadn't been able to afford a Keith, is very telling.
How'd you go, honey?
I was gonna say, it's a miracle my cat hasn't walked behind my head by now. She's asleep somewhere.
Sorry, that's the first time.
It's fine.
Adventure, my kids.
All right, I think we're. Does anybody else? I'm gonna put out a call for last questions. So folks who are listening, if you have any more questions under your hat, type them in now. I'm gonna ask both of you for a very quick answer. You both published books in the past 2 months. What can people do to support you and to support authors right now?
Well, one thing they can do is like order books. Not just ours, but like any books by authors with books out right now from bookshop.org. They donate a large, I think 30% of their profits to independent bookstores. You can also go to like the website, quite possibly of your favorite independent bookstore, and order books straight from their website, and they'll probably even get even more cut of profit from that sale. So that's like a great thing to do right now and support independent bookstores that are currently closed for everyone's health.
That was exactly my answer too, because I think people who have books coming out right now, it is a challenging time to put a book out into the world, but independent bookstores this is such a challenging time for them too. And they are just sort of the lifeblood of the whole ecosystem. And so I think if ordering your books from bookshop.org or from your, if your local independent bookstore is doing direct shipping, like that's just such a great thing to be doing right now. I am trying, like, anytime I have a little glimmer of like, oh, I'd like to have that book, I'm just like, it's like my indulgence for myself. Like, I'm just gonna get it, and then you feel like you're also supporting this piece of the industry that is in trouble right now, unless we help.
What I've noticed is I keep trying to pay attention to books that are coming out more than I usually do, and I keep finding amazing books that have just come out, and I'm like, oh, I guess I got to get that one. I got to get that one. Oh, good question from Emily. Thank you, Emily. I didn't think she was going to make it. Now she's here. Do either of you feel inspired by the pandemic, or is it something you'd rather not address in fiction? She read recently that there was very little contemporaneous creative outbreak from the 1918 flu. That's really interesting. I didn't know that.
You want to go first, Claire?
So I tend not to write about things, like I found this even in my own life, like I don't write directly from my own life in general, which is perhaps part of the answer. But I think I'm always sort of writing about things that my own life has made me think about. And I found that when I do that, I'm often writing about like one or two life stages before the one that I'm in. So like I haven't really written about being a parent yet. I mean, I'm sort of starting to do that now. But so I think that I probably won't know if I'm going to write exactly about the pandemic for like several years. So I think it just takes that long for that right-brained part of yourself to figure out if this is something it has something to say about. I'm sure that in some way I will write about the things that this time has made me think about and feel, but I don't really know if I'll like set out to write a pandemic book exactly. Mary, what do you think?
I don't think I'll write a pandemic book. I don't know if I could capture it right. But as I mentioned, my next book is about women in transformation from, sort of a strange new illness that nobody knows why it's happening to this like Kafkaesque situation they're in. And like one thing that is interesting to me is to see like how everyone is responding to the pandemic. And like, so I'm thinking about like, how would they respond in my world to women getting sick like this? Would people be afraid of them? Would people, treat them differently, isolate them, So it's interesting to me from that angle, like a societal angle, but I don't think I would ultimately write about this in particular. It would need to make it strange in my own way. We had that before the pandemic, so it's like, it's not really going to be about that, but it's interesting for me to see like what's happening on a response level.
I woke up last week at some point and found myself thinking that maybe the perfect genre for the pandemic is actually horror or gothic horror. Like we're all trapped in our houses with whatever's in our houses. Surely that's where gothic horror comes from. Like the true story of this pandemic might be people being eaten by their toasters or something.
I don't think my toasters and my women toasters in the book will be doing that.
There you go. I mean, I love my toaster, no offense here, but it's just, I don't know. I wonder if I don't know. It felt like the right genre somehow. Anyway, you guys showed up to hear from Mary and Claire, not from me. So, is there anything that you two would like to say before we close out? Because I think we're just about done.
I just want to say, like, I love Claire's book so much. Like, the sentences are so lush and beautiful, and it's so like eerie, and it builds so beautifully. It feels like perfectly structured to me, and I want to like encourage everyone who hasn't bought it yet to like go and get their copy immediately.
And same for Mary's book, which is just, I don't know, I think that it is so rare to find that combination of sort of intellect and feeling. And just these stories, each one of them is so different and so exhilarating, and just really everyone should read this book.
I co-signed both of those, and I will tell you this, if you buy them together, you're going to get a very cool experience of getting two books with embroidery on the cover. They both have really good covers, and they both use a kind of embroidery look that I think is sort of, oh, good. Mine are on a bookshelf over there, not to hand, but oh, that's nice. Yeah, you get emojis and you get birds. They're both great. So Mary spoke a little bit earlier about how technology is letting us connect right now in an important way and reminds us that it's worth the effort. And that reminded me that I wanted to say that this event happened because Mary tweeted she was looking for reading opportunities, and I tweeted back at her. And we sort of found each other on Twitter, which is obviously the worst social media channel because everybody's mean and cranky all the time. But I'm so delighted that we could make this event happen just because I got really over-caffeinated and spent too long on Twitter. Everybody who came tonight is watching because the connections that our community can make go beyond face-to-face conversations. We don't have to be in the same bar to have a good reading. And I'm really, really glad about that. I want to say thank you to everyone who commented or asked a question. Showing up is an amazing way to support nonprofits. It's a great way to support artists. Having you guys here is very important. And your time is important, especially right now. So thank you for being here. Thank you to Mary and to Claire for being so generous with your own time. If you are able to give back in any way, if you want to buy the books, there are links to both of them in the description for this video and on our website and on our social media and on both of the authors' websites, pretty much anywhere. Buy a copy of The Illness Lesson, buy a copy of You Will Never Be Forgotten. Pen and Brush is publicly funded and suffering with our doors closed. If you are moved to make a donation to us, you can go to our website. We would be happy to tell you more about what we do and how you can support us in this time. That is actually it for my thank yous. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you. It's just such a pleasure. Thank you.
Such a pleasure.
It really, really was a pleasure. So I'm going to click the big red button that says end broadcast. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Good night.